Of all my grandparents, I was closest to my grandma Lippert. And I remember her doing two things. I remember her preparing food for our major family gatherings in the kitchen, and I remember her sitting in her chair working on various knitting and crocheting projects. She didn't say a whole lot. My parents tell me that she would speak up every once in a while to defend my eating. I had a habit at the holiday gatherings of swiping as many of Grandma's homemade pickles off the relish tray as I could before the meal was served, and my parents would reprimand me as I stood there with pickle juice dripping off my elbows. But as I went off to play, then my grandmother would turn to my parents and say, "If the boy wants to eat, let him eat." I don't remember her being overly affectionate either, but she was just at the center of a family experience that I loved. We would go to Grandma's house on Christmas and Easter and Thanksgiving and other major holidays. And this house smelled of good food, and the cousins that I idolized were there, and we would make a pilgrimage to the family farm at the end of the day. Grandma would always show us during these days her latest knitting projects, her crocheting projects. And towards the end of her life, she started working on afghans. She was making large afghans for each one of her children, and then for each of the grandchildren, too. And I was the youngest grandchild, so my afghan came last. Each afghan had the same ripple pattern, this zigzag pattern, but all of the color schemes were different. Everyone got to choose what colors they wanted. And I remember my sister's afghan coming to our house, and it was different shades of pink, and it was very pretty for a girl. But I didn't love pink. I loved the Minnesota Vikings. And so I was bound and determined that my grandma was going to make me a Minnesota Vikings afghan. So I remember going to the fabric store and picking out purple yarn and lavender yarn and white yarn, and I grabbed some gold for my parents. But my parents vetoed the gold. Only purple and lavender and white for my afghan, which was okay. A few months later, we picked up my purple afghan at a holiday gathering, and everybody agreed that my purple afghan was the most beautiful that Grandma Lippert had made to that point. I was very proud. I still wished it had a little bit of Vikings gold in there, but I still loved it. And shortly after finishing my afghan, my grandmother got ill and went to the hospital, and she died not long after. Well, in the years that followed, I never really used this afghan. Our house was plenty warm in the wintertime, and so I didn't feel the need to cuddle up with a blanket. And this afghan wasn't necessarily a cuddle up with sort of afghan. It was stiff and scratchy. It was the equivalent of a thick wool sweater. It was like the brown coveralls you wear when you're really serious about staying warm. This was a stiff, scratchy blanket from my stout German grandmother who was bound to care for her skinny grandchild that she knew was going to get cold at some point. But my afghan sat neatly folded at the end of my bed, day after day. When I was 12, my parents remodeled the basement, and I moved into a brand new room with brand new blue carpet and a brand new blue bedspread. But my purple afghan didn't match the blue, so it moved neatly folded into my closet, and there it stayed for years. I went off to college at 18, but bringing Grandma's afghan with me wasn't a real manly thing to do, so I left it at home. And finally, once we were married and had a house with our own closets, then it made the pilgrimage to my house to be in the closet with our blankets. Only this year, when we moved to a drafty farmhouse that was expensive to keep warm, did the blankets and this afghan come out. Each night during the winter, we played the thermostat game in our house, daring to push that thermostat 1 degree lower to see how cold we could survive, how cold we could have it and still survive in this house. And all the blankets came out. Every single one in the closet was out on everyone who was sleeping at night. And without a thought, I would lay this purple afghan that my grandmother made for me, her youngest grandchild, on to a sleeping Ruthie, who was her youngest great-grandchild. Without a thought, I did that every single night of this winter. And then this last week, when it was snowing, I placed the purple Afghan on a sleeping Ruthie one more time, and I finally realized, it dawned on me, that the love my grandmother put into that Afghan at the very end of her life was now finally coming out, caring for her great-granddaughter, who was born 20 years after she died. In that moment, my grandmother was resurrected. I saw her love come back to life. I realized that her love was never really gone. It was always waiting there. I saw her again in my mind, patiently working in her chair, her love and care going into this Afghan. She had no way of knowing where that love of hers would go or when it would be put to use. She simply offered it, and it lives on. The resurrection story assures us that God's love never dies. Even when we can't see it or feel it, we're invited to believe that it's there, waiting like a blanket in a closet for the right moment to be made visible, to cover us, to give us what we need. The Gospel of John focuses on God's love more than the other three Gospels. In John we had the line, "For God so loved the world, that God gave a Son." And in the letters of John, which are likely written by the same author, we have the line, "God is love." The message the Gospel is trying to send is that in a world where there's separation between God and the world, God was grieved by this. And God wanted to fix it. So God sent Jesus Christ into the world. And through the crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension back to heaven, Jesus pulls the world back to God. And that separation is eliminated. And there's nothing that could cause separation between God and the world, between God and us. And that's why in the story we read for today, when Mary discovers that this is Jesus, and she reaches out to Jesus, Jesus says, "No, wait, don't hold on to me, because I haven't ascended yet. Don't hold me down because my work isn't finished." This gospel invites us to believe that powerful love is here in our midst. We're invited to believe that this love is what is most powerful. This love brings life out of death. This love dismantles fear. We're invited to believe that this love will outlast the presence of sin and brokenness. Believing this about God and the world changes our lives. When we believe in the powerful love of God, no matter how bad things get, we still expect powerful love to turn up. We know it's just a matter of time before love shows its face again. Even when we can't see love, we figure that love is doing something behind the scenes that we can't comprehend or understand, and so we don't despair. We have hope. If we believe that love is present, that love is more powerful than anything else, then we will be saved by hope. And that hope will literally start changing our lives and our minds. I read an article recently titled "The Belief Factor in Biology," written by Bruce Lipton, a med school professor, research scientist, and stem cell biologist. He says that our positive and negative beliefs not only impact our health, but every aspect of our lives. Your beliefs act like filters on a camera, he says, changing how you see the world. And your biology then adapts to those beliefs. When we truly recognize that our beliefs are that powerful, we hold the key to our freedom, he says. And then he explains what he does in his lectures. In lectures that he gives, he gives everyone who's there a screen, either a red screen or a green screen. And then he points them to a screen that's up front where there's going to be an image cast. And he tells them to put this filter in front of their eyes. So those who have the red filter, or red screen, look through it and they see an inviting scene, one where there's sunshine and there's birds flying through the air and there's this warm, inviting cottage with the message at the bottom, "I live in love." And those who put the green filter in front of their eyes see a threatening sky. They see bats flying around and snakes slithering, and they see this rundown house and a message that says, "I live in fear." And then he asks people to shout out what they see, and so the crowd is saying at the same time, "I live in fear" and "I live in love." And they're all confused as to how they could see such different things. And his point is that we choose what we see. He then tells his audience that if you choose to see a world full of love, your body will respond by growing in health. If you choose to believe that the world is full of fear, then your body's health will be compromised. Physiologically, you will literally start shutting down and pulling in a protective response. It's not our genes, but our beliefs that control our lives, he says. There's nothing wrong with going through life wearing the proverbial rose-colored glasses. In fact, those rose-colored glasses are necessary for cells to thrive, he says. Positive thoughts are a biological mandate for health. Now, when I read this article, I see science not in conflict with faith, but science affirming the invitation that Christian faith has been offering all along. Our faith actually takes this much further. Our faith makes claims about the heart of reality. Our faith proclaims that God is present, that God is love, and this powerful love is what is most real. And on Easter, we proclaim the story that says this about the world, that even when it looks like greed and fear and the corruption of our leaders and sin have crucified all that could possibly save us, if we can bear to wait those 3 long days, we'll find that love is still there. We'll find that God is still there, breathing life into what we gave up for dead. And we'll start to believe what is true, that nothing can take this love away from us. Nothing in life, nothing in death can take this love from us. And we'll let go of our fear. And no matter how bad things get, we'll hold on to hope, because we'll know it's just a matter of time until love starts showing up and bringing things back to life. Through the Christian faith, God is continually offering us an invitation. God is inviting us to step into the resurrection story and live it out for the rest of our lives. Living out resurrection is like putting that red screen in front of our eyes. Where before we only saw a world that was falling apart, now we see the ways that love is holding us all together. Living out resurrection brings those moments where you realize that the love of a grandmother has never gone away. It's been waiting for you, patiently, quietly, carried in the thread of a purple afghan. And when you wrap up your child, one that you hold most dear, you discover that the love of another is there with you. And it's impossible to see where the love of God stops and the love of human beings begins. It's all sacred. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that you've seen powerful love where you'd missed it before. May we respond to God's invitation and live resurrection. May we see powerful love, bringing life out of death, holding us together, bringing us back to life. May we know deep within us that this love is what is most real, so that when we must live those 3 long days between Good Friday and Easter, we will be saved by our hope in the love of God. May it be so. Amen.